Hi, I'm Stevie,
And I'm Niusha.
and we're here together to review the filmography of Gary Marshall. Gary Marshall is a comedy director, and he's probably most known for being a television producer, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, but we're solely going to be looking at his films that he directed. His first film, Young Doctors in Love, was released in 1982. Now, Nusha, what did you think of Young Doctors in Love?
Well, looking at it from my own personal standpoint, the entire time, I could not help but constantly compare it to Airplane, because it's the same, relatively same time period, same style of parody, generally same style in the acting, but it obviously had a line of its own, and it had a much stronger storyline and a focus on the individual characters and their lives, as opposed to the jokes and the gags and the things that make it more of a comedy. So in this sense, it's not quite as focused on that element as it is on following the storyline and on creating more of a dramedy.
Mm-hmm. Young Doctors in Love is weird for me because I know where Gary's filmography goes, and he's much stronger later on, but he never went to this style of comedy again.
Mm-hmm.
And even his television work isn't this style of comedy, so I didn't think it was the most successful final product, and I think it's because it just wasn't his comedy that he was used to doing. Um, yeah, I don't really like parodies. I haven't seen Airplane, so I can't make that comparison. But I mean, it's okay, right? I mean,
Well, it is a fun. It's an acceptable film. I'm not upset with the film, and in reference to his take in comparison to the rest of his work, I think it's unfair to compare this to any of his other work, because clearly it's a very different style, and it's a style that he's not used to. So it would take more than one or two efforts. Like I had mentioned to you earlier, the makers of Airplane had to take a couple of films in order to finally get into a rhythm and a pacing and understand how that style of comedy works and how that parody functions. So I think he did a very, very good job, considering it was his first and only attempt in this style of parody. I will give him that. The main issue he had, from my standpoint, was pacing, timing. That's the key to comedy. Timing is everything, and so the issue with this film was the fact that his timing was slightly off.
Like the phone ringing in the background.
Yeah,
it's a little slightly off of our timing right now.
A little bit.
But like, I think the thing Gary learned the most in Young Doctors was to always try to have something interesting going on screen. Like, the joke you laughed the most at was the little person who just couldn't put the phone back on the receiver.
Well, see, that's in my opinion the key to the best parodies. The best parodies are a mixture of references and dramatic irony. It's that constant double action going on the screen. There's the foreground, okay, what is supposed to be our focus, and in the background, what is actually our focus. And that's what I think is also key to the parody, because it plays on what you expect and on what you would want to see. So you have the understood concept, the storyline, the characters we're focusing on in the foreground, but then the background is the joke. It's the thing that, all right, this is actually what we're trying to say here. This is not something to be taken that seriously.
Yes. You know, that was not in the script.
The phone joke?
Yeah, the phone joke was something they made up on set because Gary thought the scene was boring.
Yep. That makes total sense. And that speaks back to the idea of the double action, because the background action undercuts the foreground action. So it actually highlights the element of the foreground action. That scene, you're right, without that gag in the background, it would just be incredibly boring. But having that going on in the background, underlining and undercutting what's happening in the foreground, I think makes the foreground that much more apparent, because of you're trying so hard to focus.
Now, Hector Elizondo is in every single one of Gary's movies, and in this movie, he is in drag for the majority of his role. Now, you haven't seen too many of Gary's movies. What would you say about Hector's performance in this one?
I laugh because I actually have seen it. I've seen Pretty Woman, and I've seen enough of Princess Bride to see him play other roles. In those two films, he plays such a stoic, witty, dry character. So, comparatively speaking, this is so fantastic to see because he's capable of doing very, very slapstick comedy. I think it's wonderful to see. I think he did a great job of it too because his character is a character that has, I think, more subtext than a lot of the other characters do. Because of the added element of, alright, he's a mobster and he's trying to take care of his father and keep an eye on him, but at the same time, he's actually finding things out about his sexuality and his gender identity through the process of just trying to disguise himself. Which I think is just a hilarious and really interestingly poignant twinge to that character. It gives him such a touch of reality that's still hysterical to us.
Crazy. I thought the very end as well. I liked Hector as well. Of course, I liked Hector. I like him in everything, though. I thought the very end when they give all of the characters their future, I thought that was a little weird. That's like when they gave the futures to the characters in American Graffiti weird.
Yeah.
For me. But American Graffiti, it worked better than it did in Young Doctors in Love.
I think number one, it goes back to the issue of pacing. I think there was just a general overlaying issue of timing, and if the timing was solved, all the other issues with the movie could very easily be forgivable. Like, you wouldn't even notice them because the timing covers everything up.
Mm-hmm.
The futures that they had given them were altogether fairly strange and somewhat irrelevant, which which I guess was the intention, but it didn't really strike properly. But if the pacing had kept up and it had been one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, as opposed to one. Number two, it let it sit too long, as opposed to being a rolling joke.
Oh, true. Pacing is a severe problem with this film, as it is with some of Gary's other work. Gary, I think, has some extraordinary films coming up, but right now, it's not the worst thing you can ever see, but it's definitely not one I would really go out and rent on my own if I wasn't a Gary fan.
I wouldn't watch this again unless someone asked me to watch it with them.
Yeah. So, okay, overall, what can be learned from this film for future filmmakers out there?
Juxtaposition is a very, very valuable and important tool, especially in such an image-based art form. And timing really is everything in comedy.
Amen to that. Okay, so what you've already pretty much given your recommendation. You would say that you wouldn't watch it again unless someone flat out asked you to watch it. I don't think I would either. I would say skip it, ultimately. It's just not really worth your time. It's not a very good comedy. It's definitely not the worst I've seen, but it's not one that people would really want to talk about.
Unless you're doing what we're doing and examining his filmography, there's no real reason to look into it.
Mm-hmm. Unless you are an analyzer, which I know there's a lot of you out there. Well, until next time, when we watch The Flamingo Kid, peace out.